This is a Bergen Film Club podcast.
Like an old movie removed from the frame, I am floating and looking for someone to blame. Won't you project me on the walls of your heart? I'm waiting for the real thing to start.
Hello, and welcome to The Function of Film, a special season brought to you by Bergen Film Club, brought to you by The Real Thing, brought to you by me, Joseph Lawrence. Hi. I'm very excited about this. This is going to be a really cool thing, I think. So like I said, if you've listened to the trailer or if you're just jumping in now, hey, this is going to be a 6-part season that's going to take place over the whole summer. It's going to be in 3 parts, 2 episodes a month. And the first part that we're starting with is we're going to talk about film projection. So function of film, basically this whole season is revolving into looking behind the scenes and what is really happening in a cinema and also in film, in music, why do we make movies, so on and so forth. But this first part, like I said, is dealing with projection. I think this is a really overlooked and unsung kind of part of the movie process. I, for one, and I know that probably a lot of people also, you just go to the cinema, you sit down, you watch a film and you leave, but you don't think that this show that you've just watched has basically been created for you by one person. That whole experience has been curated by a projectionist. Someone is controlling the lights, they're controlling the screen, the movie, everything is under their control in that cinema room. And we're going to learn about that today, and that's going to be really cool. So we were joined by Alexa Rainsbeck, who has been a projectionist for over 20 years. She has projected at many places, and she is amazing and very intelligent and awesome person. So it was great to talk to her and get educated. So this first part, we're going to be learning about projection. Specifically just what is projection, what is the role of the job, and yeah, basically I'm calling it Who's Behind the Curtain. So we're going to start with that, and the second part is dealing with the future of projection as a medium, where it's going, where it's come from, and maybe some other kind of trials and tribulations. That episode will be out in 2 weeks' time. But for now, let's get into the interview. I really hope you enjoy it because I loved doing this. It was very, very fun. So without any more waiting, let's go. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for being on the podcast. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing all of your expertise and opinions on projectioning and to teach everyone and myself about the art of projectioning. So just to start off, can you introduce yourself and say what you do?
Hi, so I'm Lexi, and I've been a cinema projectionist now for almost 20 years. I don't do it full time anymore. I do it freelance and I tend to teach and train around the subject. I actually work in software now, but for a long time I was the person in the projection room putting these films on for people to watch.
So what kind of software are you working in now?
The digital cinema software. Yeah.
Cool. So I think I was more interested. So a lot of my questions and a lot of the quotes that I have are coming from this documentary that I watched a couple of days ago, An Oral History of London Cinema Projectionists, which you were in.
Yes, I was, yeah.
There you were. And a question that they asked, which I thought was really nice, was how did you get into projectioning? So could you tell us a bit about that?
So my first job was working in a cinema. It was a local multiplex in sort of the largest town near me. I lived in a smaller village, so I had to transport into the larger town to actually get some work. And it was generally just work it was generally so I could just get some money because I was going through college at the time, and I was 17. And I started out on the box office and sort of on the floor, so like selling tickets, cleaning screens, serving popcorn, so all of those kind of functions.
Hmm.
And I really enjoyed it. But there was always this door at the end of the cinema that was restricted. Actually had a sign that saying, restricted area, so on and so forth. And I was just really interested in what was behind the door. So for a long time, I was just really interested in kind of what projectionists might be doing.
Yeah.
And I kept badgering them and asking them, kind of what they did and like, could I see the projection room? And kind of over time that paid off. There was a point where I went to university, so I was working in my old cinema sort of during holidays and then in my other cinema during term time. And I was doing it in both cinemas, like trying to get friendly with the projectionist and kind of see what was going on. And it did eventually pay off. I did get to sort of help them out with bits and pieces, and that's how I gradually started learning. And then it was in the cinema where I went to uni. There a few of the projectionists left, so I sort of went to the manager and I said, "Oh, I really want to be a projectionist." I was working my way up the cinema at that point anyway, so I'd been a supervisor and I'd also been looking after local marketing. So there was quite a few sort of bits I was already doing, so I could kind of be trusted. So I got given a chance to do it, which was really good. And at the start, I was known as it's a term called ghost. So basically, I'd be ghosting other projectionists. I'd just be following them around and watching what they did.
Okay.
And then after a little bit of time, I was allowed to be trusted with smaller parts, sort of actually physically doing stuff. And then eventually, off the back of that, I was able to get a contract as a film projectionist. So you kind of had to prove yourself. But it was just out of it. A lot of it, I suppose, it was out of curiosity. That was the first sort of reason.
Yeah, I thought that just on that, a great quote from the documentary was saying that the projectionists are like lighthouse keepers in the sense that you like don't actually know if someone is there or not. But I do get that it's sort of like a mysterious thing. You really don't see what's going on behind the scenes when you're just attending a cinema. So it is mysterious.
Where the whole concept of the role is that you're invisible. That's what, if you're a good projectionist, you're absolutely invisible because what you're doing, the artistry of it and the actual technical element of it is not supposed to be seen by the audience. You're kind of just dropping them like a lullaby in a way into the dream world of whatever film it is. And if you've done that correctly, people will just be focused on the cinema screen and not what's going on in the projection room behind them.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely one of those jobs where you are sort of invisible, and it's only when something goes up, something goes horribly wrong that people suddenly realize, oh, what's going on? It's ruined my film. So it is. It's a unique job.
So can you describe a little bit like what sort of responsibilities you were taking on when you were first learning to be a projectionist? Because I think here I really just want people to learn about it, I guess, because it is sort of this, like you said, behind the screen sort of thing. So
so a lot of it was cleaning. It's really important to have a clean projection room. So you have to clean down the projectors. You have to actually keep the whole projection room clean as well. So a lot of it was cleaning things. Then it was when a film would come in, it would come in several reels. I'd say a typical film would be about 5 or 6 reels, but you do get ones that are longer than that. And with the reels, you had to basically check the film because it's probably been projected before it's come to the cinema. So you have to basically run the film through your fingers, holding each edge, because you have to feel for any kind of damage to the film, which might cause an issue when you're projecting. It depends on the type of stock that you're running. There is several different base stocks. Some are stronger than others, but with acetate stock, which was sort of used between 1950 and the early 2000s or 90s, if you had a little split in it, that could just easily snap in the projector and you'd actually have the whole film snap and stop and go off screen. So it's really, really important that you feel for any kind of nicks or kind of cuts in the film. If you do find any, you then have to repair them. And that's generally done with splicing tape. So it's like sellotape, but it's not sellotape. I'm going to emphasize that very strongly because projectionists who run out of splicing tape and have used sellotape are very, very naughty people.
Okay.
In my mind. What the difference is the glue on the back of it specialist. So you have the ability to peel off the tape with ease without damage to the film. If you use sellotape, unfortunately, it will absolutely damage the film, especially after it's been put through a hot lamp. So you do generally use splicing tape to attempt to kind of fix any of these issues. You might use a few other methods like potentially if there's been a sort of damage to the edge, you might have to sort of gently cut into it just to kind of get rid of any sharp edges or anything which again could pull and potentially break in your projector. So there's sort of a few things you can do to fix film. So that's the first thing to check, and you're checking for scratches as well. So either side of a film can get scratched. The bit where the actual image of the film is printed on it, and the base, which is the other side. Scratches generally look like lines, but when you actually project them on screen, you'll see either the very long black lines going down the picture, or you might get coloured ones. So it depends which side of the film has been scratched. There's not a lot you can do about that. It depends. If there's another print around, you might be able to call up the distributor and say, "Hey, this print's not in good condition. Can you send another one down?" But it's good to know what condition the film is in because you might need to make a decision as to whether you can show it or not.
Yeah, wow.
So whilst checking for damage, you also this is where it changes depending on the type of projection system you've got. There are 3 types of film projection. There's reel-to-reel, there's tower projection, and there is platter projection. So reel-to-reel is the archive standard, and it's the oldest type of film projection that's been around. And that's where you have 2 projectors. And basically, you have one reel on the first projector and a second reel on the second projector. And you at the front of each reel is a countdown leader that's got the numbers. So, 9 to sort of 3. And you generally need to put that in the correct place, and that allows for the projector to get up to speed when you start it. So you'll have reel 1 on, it's showing the film to the audience, and the end of the reel's coming up. At that point, you're going to be looking for Q dots, or what's also colloquially known as cigarette burns. They're kind of the dots or marks that you'll see in the top right-hand corner of the screen. If you're watching some old films on television that they've not sort of cleaned up, you might actually see them. And if you're watching an older thing on television, so keep a look out for that. But they're only printed on 4 frames of the film, so they're very, very quickly gone. So the first set, there's 2 sets of dots. The first set of dots near the end of the reel is to tell us to start the motor on the second projector. So that projector then gets up to speed, and then you'll see the next set of dots, and that's when you open up the picture on the second projector, because the projector at that point has got up to speed, and you're also opening up the sound. And then the other projector is kind of closing down. So effectively, you're doing this dance between both projectors to keep continuity with the film. So it's reel 1, reel 2, reel 3, reel 4. That's generally the archive standard because the heads and tails of the film. So I said about the leader a minute ago, and at the end of the film, there's a bit of tail as well. When a film is printed, it comes with these, and it generally keeps the film sort of protected from damage. And they're not cut by the projectionist in this way of projecting. When you do a platter or a tower system, the other 2 systems I mentioned earlier, that's where you have to actually put the film together all in one large reel. So you can't have the start of each reel sort of there. Otherwise, you're going to be showing bits that the audience don't need to see in between each reel. So generally what you have to do is cut where the last frame of film is, or the second frame if you're keeping a reference frame. And then you cut the head of the next reel and you kind of join them together with the splicing tape, and it becomes one really large, big film print. Platter is just as it sounds. It's just a very large plate. And film is fed to the projector off of this plate and goes through a series of rollers and then goes back onto another plate. You don't need to rewind this type of film projection. You do with reel to reel, because the reel goes from top to bottom, and when it's gone through the projector, its tail will put out, so it's at the end of the film, or the end of the reel rather. So you have to go back and rewind it. It's definitely for showing it again. if you put it through the projector that way, it's going to be backwards, which is not good. With the platter system, you don't need to rewind. It would just go back onto another plate and wrap round. And again, when you need to project the film again, you would put a device in known as a brain or a feeding unit, and that would relay up to the projector from the middle each time. So it was a way that kind of eliminated having to do rewinding. And the tower system's very similar. It's just a very, very large spool. It's about 6,000, but no, bigger than that actually, probably 8 to 10,000 with really big spools. And again, it's just a film all in one go. So kind of depending on how you're projecting is how you would make the film or put the film together. But regardless of that, you'd still have to check the damage and check everything was okay. Generally as well, if you're doing the reel-to-reel type of film projection, you need to write down the cue dots, because you might not be the projectionist actually running the film. It's great if you are, because you've sort of seen the film. You're making it up, so you might know where it is. They do come in sort of different styles, and especially if the ends of the film have been sort of cut over time, which can happen with the platter type of projection. You might start losing frames from the end of the reels, in which case the cue dots might also have gone. So you then need to shift marking the cue dots further in to keep the timing. So one of the most important things is to write down what the cues are from the projectionist who's running them, even for yourself, because you might make it up on a Thursday and then project it on a Sunday. You've totally forgotten what they are. So extensive notes is really, really important. And also extensive notes on damage is really important, or the quality of the film, because you need to kind of keep a record. And especially if something happens to the film after you sent it away from your cinema, like it's had a bad projectionist or someone who's not trained to run it, or even just an accident, because they do happen. You need to be able to prove that it wasn't you or your cinema that had done that. So yeah, extensive notes as well. So then after you've made the film, it'd be a question of making sure you need to also work out the ratio and the sound track type. And you have to set the projector up with relation to those two things. And then I guess, you're kind of show ready at that point. As long as you've cleaned the projector down and you're good to go, you then thread it or lace it through the projector. And then you can run your film.
Just learning about it and even just hearing that now. I've never done reel-to-reel projection myself, but it sounds like the people who do it and do it well are very impressive people, because it sounds like you had to be completely in control.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to be focused. And you definitely have to. There's a level of kind of adrenaline that you need to do it as well, because you need to be on your toes, but then you can't get too anxious, because if you get too anxious, things will start going wrong for you. So you gotta just find this. You got to kind of find this medium where you're on edge and you're there and it's live and it's got to go well, but then not feel too weighed down by all of that.
So you just mentioned as well, including sound and all that, kind of incorporating the whole cinema experience into that. So I think, if people already weren't thinking about the projectionist showing the film, they may not also think about them controlling the lights, controlling the sound of the cinema. And another great thing for the documentary was everyone was sort of talking about the showmanship element of being a projectionist, even though it's kind of almost a thankless position. Was the sort of showmanship something you became fond of, or was it something you were attracted to at the beginning?
I was absolutely attracted to it at the beginning because I'm quite a creative person. I have a good eye for things. I'm also very technical, so the two things actually came together really well. So I got to express both sides of myself through that. So yeah, it's generally termed showmanship or presentation. I tend to say presentation. I think some of the older projectionists tend to use the term showmanship.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really important. There's a lot of little things that we do to make the cinema experience the best it can be to people. So one of the things we do is the non-synchronized sound, or we call it non-sync. That's basically just music as you walk into the auditorium. So it's really, really important to pick a complementary soundtrack. You don't ever want to run the soundtrack of the film that you're playing because it can actually undermine when it's being heard in the film. So it's really, really important you find something that kind of suits it. You don't want something that's completely different to the film either, because then it just doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
So it's just finding something for each film that complements the soundtrack. And what we try to do is run the last track. We try and work out the countdown. So the doors will open, say, 20 minutes before the film. So you can then set the CD player or whatever mode, or potentially MP3s, however people are doing it. I mean, some of the places I've worked, we've had a cassette player, we've had mini disc, we've had MP3, we've had CD, because actually projectionists tend to keep a very large library of soundtracks around, or just different types of music, so they can just cater to every potential film that they're going to show.
Wow.
So what we would try and do is end the last track right at the time that you're going to start your film, because you don't particularly want to cut into, the film start the film halfway through a song or something, because it might sort of slightly ruin the ambience.
Yes.
So that's one of the things. Some of the older or some of the more independent cinemas will have curtains, or what we term as tabs, with sort of lighting or nice lighting on. It could also be a blank screen with some lighting on. So again, we'd set that up and make sure sort of that's looking really nice. And then it's really important that we get the timing correct when we open up the film. So you have the house lights coming down, you're going to have your tab lights coming down, and then you're going to have the sort of curtains or tabs opening just at the right moment to open up the film to hit the screen. It's actually seen as rude in the profession to show an empty or blank screen. It's actually quite commonplace nowadays, but go back in terms of the tenets of film production in the profession, bad showmanship is showing a blank screen. You should never see a blank screen. So the idea is that there's either lighting or curtains covering it up right into the moment the first frame of the film is shown. So it's all about the timing of that as well. And you don't want things to be too abrupt, because that's when the audience will notice it. So if you just slam the lights off, from full to, completely dark, that's not going to work out very nicely.
No.
And again, I mentioned earlier about cleaning everything. A lot of that is also part of presentational showmanship, because you don't want to be causing damage to the film or causing scratches. So by keeping everything clean and running well, that you're projecting the film to the best of your ability, and the film is being shown as best as it can be. We have a really important job, because we're effectively the last people in the chain, on the people that worked in the film. You have all these people in production and distribution who've worked on the film. They're putting all these hours. The directors kind of really worked hard to get everything as perfect as possible. But then if you have a bad projectionist and a bad bad film friend, that can all go out the window. The lovely cinematography or the amazing soundtrack, it can all be ruined if it's not projected correctly. So it's kind of really important that we try to uphold the standards. It's quite an important job.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, the first time, actually, I was reflecting on this recently, actually, since I have had some experience with projecting. The first time that I saw Blade Runner 2049,
Mhm.
uh, the lights didn't get brought down,
Oh
so the
no.
lights were on, and the screen was sort of like washed out, and the sound was sort of really quiet.
Yeah,
And I thought that I didn't like the movie
yeah.
because I had such a bad time in the cinema. But then I watched it again at home, and I was like, oh, it actually rules. It just that experience, the atmosphere was so bad that it actually made me not enjoy the film.
Yeah, and that is literally how powerful the that the
Yeah,
job is.
yeah,
Um, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've definitely had similar experiences, and I've gone back later and realized actually it was the presentation rather than the actual film itself.
yeah.
So yeah, I can totally relate to that.
hmm
Um,
It's so cool just hearing about all the stuff that projectionists do because I've kind of gone so long in my life without thinking about them. And now every time I'm in a cinema now, I'm like thinking who's behind there and who's controlling what and creating that atmosphere. It's really cool, I think.
yeah, I'm afraid it's gonna that was once you peek behind the curtain,
Yeah.
the magic does start to go.
uh
I'm afraid.
Um,
But I love it. You know, I wouldn't change it.
yeah. Pertaining to sort of the atmosphere, just kind of a closing question. One big thing in the um because I know this kind of topic is slightly polarizing to people. They were talking about creating this atmosphere and enjoying people talking about the film and really enjoying it at the end. What's your stance on clapping at the end of a screening?
I don't have a problem with that. I mean,
hmm
if people clap, that's great because that means they've enjoyed the film and hopefully
mm
also enjoyed my projection of the film.
Yeah.
Um, to be honest, I feel like there are worse things, like such as people on their mobile phones, or I believe it or not, computers. I've looked down to see people on
No way.
computers, massive bright screen, and it's halfway through the film, and I'm having to call someone to go and get them to to speak to that person because
Wow.
I feel sorry for the people behind them, but I feel like that's probably more of an issue than say clapping at the end of the film. And for me, I think express that's great, and people are enjoying it. So
hmm
it does feel nice when you hear that. So I know
Yeah,
it's not for me, but I can pretend.
oh yeah. Yeah.
So
Always for me, I've always maybe until I was about 14, 15, I was just going to like there's an Odeon where I live at home in the UK. Always going there, and that's sort of like the standard experience. But I started going to this independent cinema in Newcastle, the Tyneside Cinema. People were always clapping then, and I was kind of really taken aback the first time that I saw it because I was like, why is everyone clapping? But then it is kind of nice. I guess you're like thanking the projectionists without even knowing that you're thanking them, I think. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
I think it's just people's expression of enjoyment, and yeah, that's fine. And people are laughing together. I mean, I think that's one of the cool parts of actually going to the cinema. It's
hmm
that experience amongst other people, most of them strangers. And if you're having the same reactions at the same points in the film, it's reaffirming your reaction. And I think that's why it can't be replicated in the home environment as much. When people are streaming or at home, it's just not quite the same experience. There's something
yeah.
about going out and being amongst other people that really makes it special.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of not even like a question of comparison. They're so different, and like you said, going to the cinema is like an experience, and it's an activity, and I don't think it's comparable at all. It's sad that it sort of gets brought into this whole streaming stuff. It's not great. You mentioned before about that it's important to sort of have this sort of level of anxiety, to kind of keep the adrenaline going and keep the energy going, but you can't be too much. You have to keep it in check. But I was wondering if you had any. I think it's always fun to hear examples of when things don't go well. So I was wondering if you had any kind of fun examples of when maybe things haven't gone so well in a screening.
Yeah, I think we all have those closets that we like to keep shut. No, certainly. yeah, I think the one that I often go back to is so one of the so I used to work in a cinema that did platter systems. So that's where you would have effectively 10 screens potentially, and there's just one projectionist looking after those 10 screens. And that's why reel to reel can't be used in that kind of environment as well, because you're required to just be at that single screen and switch the reels between the projectors. Whereas with the platter system, just me, I had to just look after 10 screens all at once. It was that and a little bit of automation that made it possible. One of the practices that used to happen was known as interlocking. So films are generally rented by cinemas. They're not bought or paid for outright because film prints are just so expensive. So they would generally be rented. And on a big film release, even the cost of renting would be quite high. So, and imagine you want to show the newest film in say 3 or 4 screens, you're going to need 3 or 4 film prints. But if you sort of do that, calculate that per cinema, the cost very, very quickly starts adding up. So one of the practices that used to happen was known as interlocking. So that's where we would run one film print through 2 projectors or even 3 projectors at a time. And often you'd have all this celluloid sort of making its way all around the projection room. It was a bit like a web, if you can imagine it, because it had to get from one projector to another. So it might not be adjacent screens. It might be screen 1, then screen 5, and then screen 10. So we're having to climb sort of through this moving celluloid and not accidentally walk through it or anything. So it was not, that used to cause me anxiety. But on one of the times that I went and do this, one of my projectors had a fault. And I mentioned earlier about the film has to sort of gently start up and get up to speed. You can't sort of start a motor straight at the right at the maximum speed, because then we'll start causing damage to it. Well, basically my projector had that problem. It would start at the highest speed, so the slow start wasn't working. But he would only do it really occasionally, and no one could work out like what was happening. And it just so happened that I was running an interlock, and that actually means that you have to lock the projectors in, and they have to be in perfect sync with each other, running exactly the same speed and frequency. And just as I'd started it up, it did that. It decided to go in at max speed while the other projector was ramping up. And so that snapped the film, which meant then I had 2 films off screen. So then my projectionist and I, there were a few of us on at that time, we managed to sort of splice it back together. And when you're splicing it in situ on a film projector, that's actually very difficult. It's not the same as where you're making up the film, which is usually on the makeup bench. You've got a sort of specialist area for that. When you're actually having to do it physically on the projector, it's a lot harder. And you have the pressure then as well as the managers sort of calling up and going, "What's going on? Got 500 people down here going, why is my film not on?" So you sort of having to do it under pressure, and knowing that projector had this issue, we couldn't then interlock it the same way. So the question was, do we cancel the screenings or do we try and get it on? And what we ended up doing was like a fully manual start on an interlock, which is actually a very difficult thing to do because you've got to get 2 projectionists starting at exactly the same time. And that's not an easy thing to do. But we managed it. We did it. We got it on. But just before I did that, I had to go and walk up to the centre of the projection box. So we say box in the UK, it's we mean projection room. Box is the UK term for it.
Oh yeah, okay.
And there was something known as the matrix board, and it was sort of the centralised automation that helped link the projectors together. And I had to reprogram this board to allow us to keep projecting or to reset off that interlock. And there was also a fault with the board. And what happened is when I reprogrammed it, it took out another interlock that was running further down the cinema. So at that point, I had 4 screens out. The number of people, why is my film not on screen? So yeah, that was definitely a nightmare shift. but we got it all back on. We got it all running, and everyone got
Wow.
to see the film. So I suppose it wasn't a cancelled screening, but I still have nightmares about it. Even now,
Sounds really
and it's
stressful.
been almost probably 15 years, 18
Wow.
maybe.
Oh, do you remember what film it was?
Oh, I feel like I want to say Spider-Man 3.
Mm.
I might be wrong.
Yeah, but I heard all in the documentary, and I was reading different kind of stories and stuff that people accidentally not checking the reel and showing the wrong film or stuff like that. I think it sounds very stressful, but good. There's always a seemingly always a solution.
Yeah, well, there's not always, but you can, again, this is so theoretically, you can train someone to be a projectionist within maybe weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends sort of how, I suppose it depends like how well people pick it up. But really, in terms of experience, you need to have 2 to 3 years under your belt before you can really sort of, know what you're doing. So a lot of it is, it's fine when it's running fine, but when it's not running fine, that's where the skill and the training comes in.
Yeah.
And really, it's experience that makes that. Because you have to be able to keep a cool head, you have to be able to react really fast, and you have to kind of come up with a technical solution. Usually, it's very quickly about what you're going to do. So it's that kind of makes objectionists, I think.
Yeah. I think it's more tech knowledge than you would think that you need, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of technical knowledge, and it's very different as well between even just groups of projectionists and even countries, like the level of knowledge of what people is in the UK at least. We were required to change the lamps in the projectors. Now the lamps are extremely dangerous. They're under a lot of pressure. They're made of glass as well, and they've got sort of gas inside. So there's a potential for explosion if they're not handled correctly. And if they're actually on and in the projector, you absolutely can't sort of like open sort of the side of it and look, because you'd be sort of damaged. And potentially if it were to explode when it was hot, the safety equipment, if you were wearing any, it would be quite catastrophic. So we were required to sort of change those in the UK, and it was fine. We had training and everything, but I sort of discovered later on that other places would require an engineer to do it. So there are kind of different levels of training and engineering sort of level to different projectionists. So that kind of plays into it as well. I'd say. I've definitely sort of done quite a bit of engineering in my time, so that kind of does help. But the other thing that's really helpful is you have to have this sort of extensive historical knowledge, because you have to understand the different film bases. And there's been 3 throughout history. There's nitrate, which is extremely flammable, and you can't just go projecting that. It has to be projected in a specific environment with specific safety measures on the projectors. I'm one of the people that can do it and has projected it, but it's extremely rare. You then have to know, I mentioned a bit earlier, the sort of the difference between the safety bases as well, sort of acetate and polyester, because that can also affect if something goes wrong in the projector. Polyester is extremely strong; it can actually pull it over. I've seen videos on YouTube where polyester is like actually pulled projectors over.
Wow.
So it can really sort of damage. Whereas acetate's more likely to split or to just burn up very quickly. So even though it's safety film, that kind of image of the film burning on the screen, that's usually sort of acetate. Polyester can sort of do that, but it's nowhere near as much. So, and certainly if it's nitrate, well, then your whole projector's on fire and you have to leave. So, no, so you have to know your bases. You have to understand the sort of time periods that they occurred in, so you can actually make you have to understand the type of marks on the film to look for to know which base you're using, and then aspect ratios. So these are the these are kind of shape of the picture that we project. And there's just it's historical. So the first aspect ratio was 1:3:3, and then it was 1:19, then it was 1:3:7, and then up and up and up and up. So to also understand what aspect ratio that you're potentially looking at, you have to have the historical concept of when this film print was made, not necessarily in the film, but the film print, to actually work out what ratio that you're going to be showing it in. I mean, yeah, it's supposed to be on the real cams and that, but you can't really trust that. You have to actually look yourself. And so many times I've come across films that have got the wrong aspect ratios sort of written on them. So you have to really sort of know your history around that to know what you're looking at. And then again with soundtracks as well, and the type of soundtracks. There are different types. There's magnetic, there's optical, there's digital. Most film soundtracks today, or most films that are produced today, if they're being made on celluloid, will have both an analog and a digital track. You might even have multiple digital tracks. So you sort of have to know what format that you're playing back in. And in regards to optical tracks, there's quite a lot of different types of optical tracks. There's variable area, variable density. There's also then different types of compression and stuff that was put on them, or decoding that's needed. So yeah, you really have to sort of know what you're looking at and how to play the film back. So that requires a lot of historical and also potentially geographic knowledge. So a lot of films, a lot of different territories from around the world sort of had technologies change at different times. So what might be true in, say, America might not be true in Europe. So yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot, but it must just be how do I say this? I feel like you would just want to know more about everything. There's so much to know, there's so much to learn. It sounds like a really fascinating job.
I mean, I feel like I'm still learning.
Yeah.
It's been a very long time. So
yeah, just to close up this first part, at least, which is just about production. One of my favorite quotes or maybe my favorite quote from the documentary was this one man saying that most projectionists are weird people who like working alone in the dark. Is that how you would describe the average projectionist, or is that's just sort of a sweeping statement?
good question. So when I started off as a projectionist, I was generally single manning. So that would be just me in the cinema doing projection. But you also were part of a team. And it was really important that everyone in the team pulled together, because if I got handed over a complete mess, I'd be very, very upset with my colleague. And same. So it was about making sure the work got done whilst also running everything. And when you're doing that kind of projection, single manning, as I said, you have to be able to be on your own. You have to be able to not need socialization. And it's funny, it's actually very difficult for a lot of people. So it does take a certain type of person to be able to do that. But then later in my career, I did work in more reel-to-reel spaces where there were large complements of projectionists. So there was always a projectionist around, that I'd be working with, and that was cool as well. So I personally, for me, I absolutely am happy and can be in my own company and don't need to socialize. Or at the other hand, I don't mind socializing with others as well. Actually, as a person, I find it kind of difficult. And I think that's probably true of quite a few projectionists. So I don't want to generalize too much. But I'd say that a lot of them are kind of techie people, potentially a bit nerdy. Yeah, maybe some weird. Maybe some are weird. Yeah, I would go as far as saying that. But generally, I think there is a type of person that does film projection. Generally, there are people that are very attentive to detail. They're quite creative as well, technical. And some of them do struggle with social aspects of life, I think. And I think probably that's why for some people, they're good at being on their own and can work on their own. because when you run into a massive problem, there is no one to fall back on. It's just you up there.
Yeah.
So, um, you have to be able to sort of handle and manage that. And I think, and yeah, maybe that makes people weird. I don't know.
No, but I can understand. I kind of, not that I like personally would want all the pressure on myself, but in a way it's like nicer if it's just you, because you kind of, this sounds really bad, but like you can't be let down by anyone else apart from yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, don't know if that's a good thing, but that's
Mhm.
yeah. So that is the end of part 1 of Function of Film. We just learnt who's behind the curtain. And next episode, which is going to be called Going Digital, it's going to be all about the future and the past and what is happening in the current state of projection. It was this one, the one that's coming, was really, really cool. I learned a lot, and I don't know. As you heard this episode, Lexi has such great insights and she's so knowledgeable and so amazing. So it was so great to have her for this second part as well. So definitely check that out in a couple of weeks' time. But I really hope that you enjoyed this. It was such a pleasure talking to Lexi, and learning all about this is so cool, and doing the podcast is very cool. Thank you. Goodbye. This has been a Bergen Film Club production. Our music is by Wise John. Check them out on Instagram at WISEJohnOfficial. Our logo is by Pia Sofia Brentersen. This episode was produced, mixed and engineered by Joel Lawrence. Our researchers are Inke Shilprai-Bern and Mamina Nazmajid. Want to talk to us about films? Then please send us an email at podcast@bergenfilmclub.com. Follow the show on Instagram and Twitter at TheRealThingPod. Check us out on Letterboxd at BFK The Real Thing. Thank you and goodbye. Listen, follow, leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts.